Hello there, and welcome to Murder Most British. I'm Zach.
Hey, welcome. I'm Rachel.
Hey, I hope you're having a great start to your new year.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully a good one that started as you mean to go on. A happy and healthy one. Fingers crossed for you all.
Hope you're sticking to your New Year's resolutions.
Do you have any? Do you have any new?
No.
Do you make any years?
No.
No, you don't bother.
I just go, well, here we go again.
Do you know what I thought this morning? I thought, I should really make some sort of New Year's resolution. So I was thinking maybe just to get in a better sleep pattern. It might be easier to do that than try and give up smoking or...
Well, these fur babies are a bane to our sleep existence.
Yeah, our dogs are a nightmare, for we haven't really slept properly for the past month, have we?
I think it's just all the excitement and everything and people in and out and all that.
And I have separation anxiety, I think. Yeah. They just don't like to be away from me.
Yeah, we shut the door and they're just scratching at it going, let us in, let us in.
We love them to bits though, but...
Well.
Yeah. Sleep is much sleep is needed.
Yeah, we've been just kind of zombifying through the first bit of our new year here. But, oh well, we'll see how it goes
onwards
later on.
And upwards.
Yep.
Okay, so before we begin, just a small request from us.
If you enjoy listening to our true crime stories, please give us a like and a follow and a 5-star rating. It really, really helps.
Go
really.
on, max us out with the stars.
Yeah, it really, really helps. It helps with the algorithm and getting us out there. And also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Murder Most British and on Facebook at MMB Podcast.
You can also join us in the public crypt chat, which is our free Discord channel, where you can talk about cases, share theories, and read the latest news from the archive.
Your support helps the archive grow and ensures that no story is ever forgotten. This episode discusses real events involving the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of young women. Some material may be distressing to listeners, so listener discretion is strongly advised.
Now let's get into the story of the Saturday Night Strangler.
South Wales, 1973. Between the mountains and the furnaces, Port Talbot lay beneath a red sky. The steelworks breathing through the dark, lighting the clouds from below. At the weekend, the town loosened its collar. Pubs glowed. Music spilled into the streets. Laughter drifted down terraced roads and faded into smoke and rain. By morning, the streets were quiet again. Some nights ended differently. Doors stayed closed. Bedrooms went unused. Saturdays slipped into Sundays without answers, leaving only absence where there should have been routine. In time, the town would learn that not every silence was empty, and not every night returned what it took.
Port Talbot in the decades after the war was a town built around heat and routine. The steelworks burned day and night, coating streets, houses, and washing lines with fine ash. Men worked rotating shifts that blurred weekdays and weekends. When they were not on the furnaces, they were in the pubs, places where time slowed, tempers loosened, and faces became familiar. To outsiders, it looked bleak. To those who lived there, it was simply life.
Joseph Kappen was born in Port Talbot on the 30th of October 1941, one of 7 children. His parents' marriage broke down when he was young, and so in time his mother remarried. He was raised by his mother and stepfather. By adolescence, he had already come to the attention of police. At just 12 years old, he was being recorded for minor offenses, an early signal of patterns that would persist throughout his life.
Well, those offences accumulated steadily, more than 30 in total. They included robbing gas meters, car thefts, burglary, and assault. None were spectacular, none were enough to make headlines, but together they formed a consistent pattern of criminal behaviour. Persistent, opportunistic, and rarely punished severely enough or long enough to remove him permanently from circulation.
Just them petty crimes.
Yeah, well, he's obviously...
Get a slap on the
such
wrist.
a young age, that's quite a lot.
Yeah. Robbing gas meters, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think about that. And I'm thinking, well, are you actually robbing the whole meter? And is it because I think back when they used to take coins, maybe, because I remember my great-grand, she had, when I was a child, she had an electric meter that took 50p's. So maybe that's what it was. Yeah, it must have been.
Take the meter out to
go and
get the coins.
Which is going to be full of 50p's or, because it didn't, it wouldn't have took pounds.
Yeah.
Especially if the meter that my great-grand had was only a 50p meter.
I remember you telling me.
So you just have a bunch of 50p's. And,
I remember you telling me about that before, like.
Yeah, the electric will go and she'll like pop some 50p's in the meter. I'll have to go under her bed because she had like a suitcase full of like 50p coins and whatnot in there. And it's pretty much back in the old days, that's where she kept her money. She just kept it all in a suitcase under the bed.
Yeah.
They didn't have, deal with bank cards and things. It was all cash and under the bed.
So pretty much. It's that old, putting the cash between the mattresses type thing.
So,
she kept it under in a suitcase.
She just shoved it all in a suitcase. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about it. It was like, how you put money in your meter? Like, that's crazy.
We used to have a TV that we put coins into the TV unit. There's a little black box attached to it. And you had to, every time the telly went off, you had to bung a few 50p's in it. But
that's crazy.
So glad we don't have to do all that now. Anyway, let's get back to this story.
Yeah, let's get back to it. So, Kappen spent much of his adult life moving in and out of prison. Between sentences, he drifted through short-term work, most commonly as a lorry or bus driver, and occasionally as a nightclub bouncer. He rarely held a job for long. Instead, he preferred what he called hobbling.
Hobbling along.
Yeah, hobbling along. Signing on for Social Security benefits while earning cash under the table. Money came and went quickly, never lasting quite long.
He smoked cannabis and may have done some low-level dealing, but tobacco was his real addiction. He chewed it constantly and smoked around 20 Old Holborn roll-ups a day.
Old Holborn? I've never heard of this.
My granddad used to smoke that. Yeah.
God. I'm guessing it's just like a really old brand.
Old tobacco. I mean, they still do. I think they still do Old Holborn, but yeah. Ugh. It was quite a nice tobacco, to be fair. But yeah, the habit stained his teeth and soaked into his clothes. A detail later noted independently by women who described encounters with him, that the smell of smoke and tobacco lingered long after he had gone.
They smelled like cigarettes.
Well, Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump. He tastes like cigarettes.
He's quoting because we watched that the other day.
Yeah, for like the thousandth time for me. But I could pretty much quote the whole thing all the way through. People who knew him casually described him as a loner. He was always out, moving between pubs, sometimes visiting 2 or 3 a night. Yet he rarely appeared drunk. He limited himself to a couple of drinks, careful not to lose control. He joined darts teams and kept acquaintances, but never allowed himself to really truly be known. People recognized him, but few understood him.
In 1962, when he was 20, Kappen met Christine Powell on the beachfront at Port Talbot. She was 17. And like many young couples at the time, they had little money and spent evenings walking or sitting in cafes. Christine later said that the first thing that attracted her to him was a small kindness. He brought her a lovely hot chocolate to warm her hands.
At the time, Kappen appeared as a catch. He was tall, over 6 foot, physically imposing, with dark features and slate blue eyes. Long before it was fashionable, he worked out with weights. He was obsessed with cars. There was always several vehicles in pieces in the front garden, always something being rebuilt. To Christine, young and inexperienced, he was tender and attentive.
Well, Christine became pregnant in the summer of 1963. The couple had married the following February in 1964. Just 10 days after the wedding, Kappen was sentenced to 3 years in prison for breaking into houses, robbing the gas meters.
There he goes again.
Yeah.
Gotta get them 50p's.
Honestly. I mean, if he's scrimping and scraping, but I don't know about trying to go in a shop with about £50 worth for 50p's, Anyway, their daughter, Deborah, was born that April while he was incarcerated, a child he would not meet until long after her birth.
In August of 1965, Kappen was released on day parole to attend his grandfather Joseph's funeral. At the wake, with a prison warden stationed downstairs, he dragged Christine into an upstairs bedroom and forced himself on her. She became pregnant again as a result. By the time Kappen was released from prison, he was a father of 2 children he had never met.
The family later moved to the Sandfields estate, but the household was unstable and often frightening. Kappen never bonded with his eldest children, Deborah and Paul. Christine later said that he had only formed a connection with their youngest child, Beverly, who was born in 1974. Money was scarce, the family were living in social housing, and Christine could not rely on her husband financially.
Well, I mean, gas meter money is, unless he's also selling the parts and all that shit as well. I mean, that's not really going to bring in a whole lot of cash.
Probably just smashing them open, getting the coins, and that's that.
Yeah, not very lucrative.
No.
Well, Kappen was frequently unemployed or in and out of prison. If he was signing on, he might give Christine a small amount of cash, like £20 at most, but often took money from her purse instead. He never went without a car, which he treated as a personal luxury. While the household struggled, his priorities were clear. Himself.
Mm-hmm.
Gross.
Well, violence inside the home was routine. Christine later said that she believed it was normal for men to hit women, that she thought that all men were violent, which is sad, But she was young. Let's remember that. She was young, naive. Obviously, her first serious boyfriend, so...
Yeah, it's just sad.
Yeah. Well, she described being raped by her husband regularly, roughly every 2 weeks. When she resisted, he insisted on what he called his conjugal rights.
Gross.
At the time, she did not recognise this as a crime.
That is gross, man. I have a right to your body because we're married.
That's terrible. That's a terrible thing.
Yeah, what a fucking scumbag. God. Oh, you've got a headache? I don't give a shit. Lay down. Come on.
I mean, I think that, it's completely wrong. But didn't they used to, because with back, royals and things like that, they would have to consummate the marriage and then, Well,
that was a bit different because you're trying to produce an heir.
Yeah.
You're like...
He clearly weren't.
It's like, come on, girl, we need to make a son,
Yeah.
But this guy, he's just like, I want it. I don't care what's wrong with you.
I'm thinking if it was like a Christian, if it was in the Bible, I haven't ever read the Bible, so I don't know if it's in there that, you have to obey and do this for your husband, whatever.
You still have to have respect for each other. That is one of the key, you can't just, I'm whoever and I'm the man, I'm going to take whatever I want. That's just.
Vice versa as well, in this day and age, if a woman was like that, hell no. Nobody should be forcing anybody to do something they don't want to do.
So anyways, the arguments were loud and frequent. Police were regularly called to the house, sometimes because of domestic disturbances, sometimes because officers were asking Kappen about burglaries or other unsolved offenses. In the 1970s, domestic violence was rarely interfered with, and Christine never really pressed any charges of any kind. Bruises were explained away, behavior was minimized, leaving was not that simple.
Yeah, I think back in them days, there were, you're married, that's it. Whatever the marriage is like, you just stick with it. They were very much, a lot of people nowadays don't, do they? They think that they can just move along, until they find someone that they really but they don't tend to work at it nowadays.
Yeah, I think other than domestic violence and
Yeah, definitely leave.
Either side getting abused, physically or mentally abused. Other than that, yes, I think that unfortunately nowadays it's like, oh, well, I'm just not really that happy. Instead of working on it and talking and communicating, they just leave, and probably give up something really great.
Well, Kappen's temper extended beyond his wife. His hobbies were solitary and controlling, breeding canaries, keeping tropical fish, and rearing greyhounds. One greyhound, though, had become a family pet. And one day, while he was exercising the dog on the local beach, he decided it was too old. He strangled it with a piece of wire in front of his terrified young son, Paul.
Well, in another incident, he forced Deborah and Paul, both under 10, out of the house late at night to search the streets for fig roll biscuits to replace the ones that they had eaten. It was 11 o'clock, pouring with rain. The children wandered the neighborhood in fear. At home as elsewhere, Kappen ruled through intimidation.
What an arsehole.
Yeah. Come on.
Honestly.
Kids are going to be kids. They're going to get into the biscuits. And come on.
Sneaky little rats. But, you don't do that, sending them out in the flipping cold and,
Yeah,
and at 11 o'clock at night, 2 under 10-year-olds.
Yeah, that's not good.
That's just not great parenting at all. Well, by the early 1970s, he was a familiar presence in Port Talbot and neighbouring towns. He was not widely known as a serious criminal, but he was recognised as volatile. The kind of man landlords watched and patrons avoided sitting too close to. He unsettled people without quite crossing a line that demanded intervention.
Seems like kind of like a sixth sense. You're like, this guy's a bit...
Yeah, I think you kind of clock somebody and you kind of like observe them for a little bit and you're like, no. Steer clear of that guy because he's a bit strange.
Yeah. Well, outwardly, he blended into the routines of the town. Inwardly, his life was marked by control, violence, and restlessness. Those close to him would later say that something was building during this period, a tightening, an impatience that they did not understand at the time. But it was already there, and it had been for years.
In Port Talbot and the surrounding valleys, the weekend unfolded as it always had. Shift workers drifted towards the pubs at closing time. Cigarette smoke clung to the low ceilings. Jukeboxes echoed through terrace streets where front doors opened and shut in steady rhythm. Buses ran late, headlights cutting through drizzle and mist, carrying people home along familiar roads. It was a Saturday like countless others, predictable and comforting in its sameness.
On the 15th of July, 1973, 16-year-old Sandra Newton traveled out that evening for a night out in the Swansea area. Discos and nightclubs pulled teenagers in from Port Talbot, Neath, and the surrounding valleys. Places of light and noise that offered music, dancing, and a few hours' escape from the routine. Sandra was known as sociable and dependable. She enjoyed nights out, but she was not reckless. She usually kept to her plans.
Well, like many girls her age, she stood on the threshold of adulthood. Old enough to move through the world on her own, but young enough that her life was still anchored by family expectations and familiar routines. In the early hours, Sandra began the journey home. Her intention was simple, to hitch a lift back towards Port Talbot, the same way she and so many others had done before.
Hitchhiking was common across South Wales in the early 1970s. The valleys lay closer together. Roads were well used. Late-night public transport was sparse and unreliable. Accepting a lift along a familiar route was not seen as dangerous. A teenager standing by the roadside did not raise alarm. It signaled only the end of another Saturday night out. That's crazy. Like, I'm thinking of back when I was a kid, and they're like stranger danger and all that shit. Like, don't talk to anybody that you don't know, and don't accept rides.
That. I mean, obviously, they probably did sort of parents say that at times, but maybe more so in bigger cities. if they're just sort of village to village or something like that, there's such small places, people knew everybody majority of the time. Maybe they just thought that their kids were safe, and didn't have to warn them. It's like,
by hitching a ride, like sticking your thumb out and being like, "Hey, I need a ride to next town over."
I wouldn't have done that. Like then or here or now, bloody hitch a ride with some stranger picks you up. It could be a murderer.
No matter where you are, man. Shit, this is prime serial killer era.
Yeah, no, don't do it, people. Well, Sandra was believed to be familiar with the route that she intended to take. She expected to be home without difficulty. She was last seen in Briton Ferry, walking away from a nightclub and heading back to Port Talbot. Somewhere along the road, she accepted a lift. What followed happened unseen, between towns, beyond the reach of witnesses or passing headlights. Sadly, Sandra Newton was never seen alive again.
Her body was discovered later in a rural area near Tonmawr. I think Tonmawr? Yes. All my Welsh people, let me know.
Yeah, don't ask me because I can't confirm whether you said that right or not. But
yeah, we're trying our best. Thank you very much. So, like I said, it was in Tonmawr, close to a disused culvert beside the road. It was the kind of place people passed without thought. Familiar enough to feel safe, isolated enough to disappear into once darkness had fallen. Sandra had been raped. She had been strangled to death using the hem of her own skirt, and her body was left there, where the road dipped away into shadow, alone and silent in the dark.
Terrible. Well, by Sunday evening, news of Sandra Newton's death had spread quickly through Port Talbot and the neighbouring towns. People talked quietly in kitchens, in pubs, on doorsteps, after dark. Details were scarce, but the conclusion was unavoidable. This had not been an accident, it was not a fall or a drunken fight gone wrong. It was a deliberate killing, and it happened to a young girl who could have been anyone's daughter, sister, or friend.
And yet, life continued. Clubs opened the following weekend. Buses ran their routes. Streets filled again on Friday and Saturday nights. People were out, cautiously, telling themselves what they needed to hear. That what had happened was rare, unlucky, a terrible one-off. For a time, it was possible, even tempting, to believe that Sandra Newton's death was an isolated crime. I think you kind of have to rationalize it a little bit, and just be like, oh shit.
I think if something like that happens, you do tend to think, oh, it's like an isolated someone that knew them, must have had an argument or whatever. You think that it's an isolated, random, just sort of out of anger, sort of thing that's not going to happen over and over and over in your area. So,
yeah, you really go be like, oh gosh, but you hope that it's not going to happen again. You hope that it, like you said, was just an isolated thing. They knew each other and it just got out of hand.
Yeah, one night gone wrong, in a group of friends or whatever. But unfortunately, weeks passed, summer faded into early autumn, and Saturday nights returned, uneasy but outwardly unchanged. The memory of Sandra dulled, pushed aside by routine, by weather, by the quiet need to believe that what had happened was an exception rather than a warning. The gap mattered.
Sandra had been killed in mid-July, at the height of summer. By the time September arrived, weeks had passed without another attack. Whatever fear lingered had no clear shape. The heat had broken. Routines had returned. And for many, the danger began to feel distant, something that belonged to a different season. Then, another Saturday came.
Well, on Sunday, the 16th of September of 1973, rain swept in from the hills as night settled over Neath and the surrounding town. Teenagers gathered in nightclubs, places that offered warmth, music, and a few hours' escape from the tightening nights ahead. For many, these evenings felt like last bright moments before the winter set in.
Among those out that night were two very close friends, 16-year-olds Geraldine Hughes and Pauline Floyd. They often went out together. On nights out, they arrived together, stayed together, and planned to head home the same way they had many times before. They were the same age as Sandra Newton, teenagers navigating that narrow space between childhood and independence, used to traveling short distances on their own.
Well, in the early hours, they left the nightclub and stepped back out into the rain. Public transport was limited. Like many others, they waited along the roadside, hoping for a lift home. It was uncomfortable, cold, and familiar. The last confirmed sighting of the girls was in Forestbach.
Forestbach.
Oh, well done.
I do believe.
I'll let him say that. Witnesses later reported seeing them by the roadside speaking with a man beside a car. At the time, it drew no attention.
Yeah, it wouldn't.
Probably just assumed it was someone they knew,
Just hitchhiking again. That's the thing. They might not even known him. But like, hey, can you drive us up to, this place? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm heading that way.
And it's also, I think, young girls, boys, quite naive around that age to an extent that if you would see somebody that lives in the same village or town as you, that you've seen on multiple occasions, you maybe not necessarily know them, but if you've familiarized, and you've seen these people, their faces over and over, they look safe to you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a small town,
They look
you just know them.
approachable and safe.
Yeah,
so,
like where I grew up, it's a small town.
Yeah.
And you'll see the same people here and there.
Regular faces and
that. You might not know their name or whatever, but you're like, hey, I know that guy, or you saw him at the football game or whatever. But, they're just like, oh, well, it's just kids getting a ride home. Someone's giving them a lift, I think that's another mindset of the hitchhiking in these small towns, possibly, where it was a duty. It's like, hey, I'm going to make sure that these kids make it home okay. I'm going to give them a ride. Well, anyways, so the cars stopped along these roads every weekend. Nothing about the moment seemed out of the ordinary. When Geraldine and Pauline failed to return home, concern set in quickly. By morning, concern had turned to fear. Searches began along the routes that the girls were known to use, checking laybys, fields, and wooded stretches beside the road. Hours passed without a word, without finding them.
God, for me, being a mum to a daughter, this was one of my worst fears.
Yeah, that she'd go out.
Do you remember when she used to want to walk up to Burger King along that main road? And I would say, you are not walking up there on your own. Any man or whatever could just pull over and drag you into the car.
Mm-hmm.
You make sure you're with a friend you can go. But,
never be by yourself.
Yeah. So I think this is definitely every mum's fear. But by Sunday morning, the search shifted to a roadside copse near Llandarcy, just outside Neath.
Well done.
I said it. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to get better at Welsh.
That was really good.
A local man, Walter Watkins, was walking through the woods when he noticed what he first thought was a doll laying in wet grass in an open patch behind a tree. But when he went closer, he realised it was the body of a young woman lying face down. Sadly, it was the body of Pauline Floyd.
Yeah, and that's crazy that this older gentleman was just out for a walk and had to stumble across something like that. That's horrible.
Yeah, that would be very, very traumatic for, I don't know how I'd feel coming across something like that, just seeing somebody, a young girl passed.
And then obviously it gets worse because not far away, around 100 yards from the first, the second body was discovered. Geraldine Hughes lay closer to the road where passing traffic would have moved through the darkness only hours earlier. The contrast between the two locations was stark, one hidden among the trees, the other exposed close to the edge of the main route. Both had been strangled with pieces of rope, still wrapped tightly around their necks where they were found. They were fully clothed, a detail that would later trouble investigators, raising questions about what had happened before their bodies were left where they had lay.
Well, that detail mattered. Post-mortem examinations later revealed dirt inside the feet of their tights, a finding investigators interpreted as evidence that the girls had been dressed again after being assaulted. The girls had been raped. It was a detail that raised disturbing questions about what had happened in the darkness, questions no one could fully answer. Medical examinations also established that both girls had not been sexually active before that night.
Wow, that's horrible. Jesus.
Absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
Poor young girls.
I think some interpreted it as they were taken, assaulted, and then made to redress, maybe something, but they just don't know.
Yeah.
But the locations were different. The method was the same. What had once seemed unthinkable now became undeniable. This was not a coincidence. It was a pattern. 3 girls, all 16 years old, all after Saturday nights out, all within a small area of South Wales. Newspapers gave it a name, the Saturday Night Strangler. It traveled not through official warnings, but through headlines and word of mouth, carrying with it not panic, but something slower, heavier.
Parents stopped letting daughters walk home alone. Lifts were arranged for even short distances. Roads that had once felt ordinary now seemed exposed. Every slowing car a question, every set of headlights a possibility. Saturday nights changed. The quiet confidence that had surrounded nights out drained away, replaced by vigilance and calculation. Girls stayed together, friends checked in more often, and still no one knew what they were watching for, only that something was wrong.
Then, just as suddenly as the murders had begun, they stopped. No 4th girl vanished. No new body was found. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, cautiously, routines returned. But the absence remained, heavy, unanswered, and unsettling. 3 young women were gone. Their lives ended over the course of a single summer. Whoever had killed them moved through the valleys unseen, struck 3 times, and disappeared without explanation. No one knew why the murders had stopped, or whether they had truly had. Sometimes with that, it's because the perpetrator either went to jail,
Died.
moved, died, something like that.
Yeah.
Because once, like,
if you can, that's clearly a serial killer, and serial killers don't tend to stop unless, like you said, they're in prison. You know, they've passed away or they've moved. You know, there's not many other reasons.
Yeah, you can see the pattern here where he was learning because he had picked up Sandra and improvised strangling her with the hem of her own skirt.
Yeah.
The second time, he came prepared with rope and did what he had to do, you know, or whatever, his little dark urge, fucking scumbag.
Yeah.
But he was learning and he was escalating. So it's like, why did it just stop? Was it because, the feds are all over, people are more cautious and I might get caught? Or did he move on to a different area?
Yeah, and start doing stuff in different areas.
Because usually serial killers, once they get a taste for it, that's it. They just keep doing it.
Yeah, many true crime shows I've watched and they don't stop unless they are stopped. The more they do it, I think the easier they find it and the more excited they are by it. So they pursue it. But anyway, let's getting into the investigation side of things. By September 1973, the violence could no longer be contained within a single case. Police in South Wales were now facing a series of linked attacks carried out along ordinary roads. in familiar towns, not remote ground, but places people moved through every day. The response came quickly, but it came unevenly.
The roads linking the towns became a central focus. Laybys, junctions, and quiet stretches were retraced repeatedly, sometimes by different teams covering the same ground days apart. Officers spoke to taxi drivers, bus staff, pub landlords, club employees, shift workers finishing late. Anyone who might have noticed a face, a car, or a routine was questioned. But leads multiplied faster than they could be verified. Many contradicted one another outright.
Well, as public fear grew, so did the flow of information. Tip-offs poured in. Some sincere, others speculative, many driven by half-remembered conversations or long-held suspicions. Each demanded attention. Officers pursued them all, knowing most would lead nowhere, but unable to risk overlooking the one that mattered. Evidence quickly became the central problem.
In 1973, forensic science offered limited help. DNA profiling did not exist. Investigators relied on fingerprints, blood group testing, fiber comparison, and witness accounts, all of them vulnerable to contamination and error. Rain had fallen at key sites. Traffic had passed through others. Time itself worked against the preservation of details. Fibers were collected, tire marks were photographed, blood samples were analyzed.
The ligatures used in the double murder were recovered, but they offered no forensic route to a suspect. There was no fingerprints that could be lifted, no fibers could be traced. Nothing about the rope could identify who had handled it or where it had come from. Tests could eliminate suspects, but they could not identify a killer. There was no scientific bridge between the murders, only similarity of circumstance.
One line of inquiry focused on a white Austin 1100 seen near the murder locations in the early hours. It was a common car, and thousands were registered across South Wales. Tracking owners meant paper records, local tax offices, and door-to-door verification, a slow, manual process with no central database.
Among those identified was Joseph Kappen. He lived in Cwmavon, within a short distance of where the girls had been found, and he was already known to police. His background, location, and ownership of a white Austin 1100 placed him within the broad assumptions investigators were working with at the time.
I just say 1100.
Yeah, well, you're American. You say like 1100 hours and all of that,
Yeah.
like 1100.
That's my military stuff. But Joseph Kappen was questioned during the inquiry. He told officers the car had been off the road at the time of the murders and denied any involvement. He denied knowing the girls and denied ever seeing them, and his wife supported his account by providing him an alibi.
Well, in 1973, there was no system capable of cross-checking those statements against vehicle records, stop and search logs, or movement data. Kappen's car was examined, but nothing was found. There was no blood, no fibres, no physical trace that could place him at the scene. With no witnesses and no forensic evidence to challenge the alibi, suspicion could not be turned into action.
Yep, they had him. But they just couldn't, they didn't have anything to nab him with.
You need that bullet,
That smoking gun.
That's the one.
Yeah. But Kappen was not alone. Other men were questioned, investigated, and released. At least one local taxi driver became the subject of suspicion, but those lines of inquiry collapsed when forensic results failed to support them. Each false lead deepened frustrations and eroded confidence. Newspapers ran increasingly critical headlines. The phrase, Saturday Night Strangler, appeared repeatedly, heightening fear while offering no clarity. Coverage generated further tip-offs, but it also distorted priorities, pulling the attention toward the most alarming rumors rather than the strongest evidence.
As the weeks passed, the investigation began to alter the atmosphere of the towns themselves. Fear curdled into suspicion, ordinary behaviour. A late-night drive, a solitary drink, a familiar car idling took on new meaning. People began measuring one another against rumours rather than facts. In close-knit communities, that pressure carries a cost.
Yep, it's just the fear.
Yeah.
It's like, who's that out there?
You suspect people, but then people are going to suspect you as well. You know, there's so much suspicion.
But it's normal, everyday behavior that you're like, that seems suspicious.
I think every town in the country would be like that.
Yeah.
So.
While friendships cooled, neighbors watched one another more closely. Some men avoided going out late at night, not from fear of the killer, but from fear of being mistaken for him.
Understandable.
Yep. He's like, I don't want to be hemmed up in that shit.
Yeah.
Parents warned daughters about lifts. They also warned sons about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The investigation weighed heavily on police and the public alike. Door-to-door inquiries returned again and again to the same streets, reopening anxiety rather than resolving it.
With each unanswered question prolonged the sense that danger was everywhere and nowhere at once. Over time, exhaustion set in. What had begun as collective urgency slowly became collective fatigue. When no further murders followed, relief mixed uneasily with doubt. The pressure that had driven the inquiry forward began to work against it, eroding momentum and dulling attention.
Behind closed doors, detectives acknowledged the limits they faced. There were no reliable witnesses, no forensic method capable of joining the dots. With no new attacks, there were no new evidence to force the progress. By the end of 1973, the killings had stopped. With no further crimes to propel the inquiry forward, the case entered a different phase. Not solved, not closed, but stalled.
Senior officers were reassigned, files were boxed, catalogued and stored. The Saturday Night Strangler inquiry became a cold case. Life went on. Joseph Kappen returned to work, drifted through relationships, lived out his years within miles of the places that these three girls had died. When Joseph Kappen died of lung cancer in 1990, he was aged 48. There was no public reckoning. He was buried quietly in Port Talbot, his crimes unknown, his name unremarkable, and his past undisturbed.
Crazy.
Mad.
Well, them cigarettes caught up to him.
Yep. All them old Albans.
Yeah, they're all old
chewing
birds.
tobacco.
Yeah. So for nearly 3 decades, the murders of Sandra Newton and Geraldine Hughes and Pauline Floyd remained unsolved.
30 years.
30 years. Well, nearly. After the investigation stalled in the mid-70s, the case files were archived by what later became the South Wales Police, joining the other unsolved cases from the period.
By the late 1990s, policing in Britain was beginning to change. Advances in forensic science were opening new possibilities for historic investigation. The National DNA Database, established in 1995, allowed genetic profiles from crime scenes to be compared against a growing pool of known offenders.
In 2000, South Wales Police began reviewing a number of historic unsolved murders, focusing on cases where biological evidence was known or suspected to exist. When the files relating to the 1973 killings were re-examined, investigators confirmed that forensic samples taken from the victims had been preserved. Although they had never been tested using modern DNA techniques, this offered a potential route forward.
The condition of the evidence was uncertain. Stored for decades under conditions never intended for genetic analysis, there was a real risk that the usable DNA no longer remained. Despite this, samples connected to the murders of Geraldine Hughes and Pauline Floyd were submitted to the Forensic Science Service for examination.
Some biological material survives better than others. Semen, when absorbed into clothing or fabric, can remain detectable long after blood or surface traces have degraded. In this case, samples had been stored as exhibits rather than discarded, preserved without any expectation that they would ever be able to be tested. Time had damaged them, but it had not erased them.
Well, with no direct match available, investigators turned to an emerging technique, familial DNA analysis. I love this stuff. This is amazing technology, what they're doing with it.
Can't catch you. We'll find out who your sister is or your brother is, your cousins, and we'll find their DNA, and then we're going to find you.
Well, rather than searching for an exact match, the analysts looked for partial matches that might include close biological relationship, such as a parent or child. The approach was cautious and methodical, with each potential lead reviewed. And guess what? One partial match stood out.
A man from Port Talbot, Paul Kappen, shared a significant proportion of genetic markers with the crime scene profile. He was not a suspect in any offense. When approached by police and informed that investigators were reviewing historic murders, he agreed to provide the DNA sample. Familial DNA analysis raised difficult legal and ethical questions.
But it risked drawing innocent relatives into a murder inquiry decades after the fact. Each potential lead required careful review, legal oversight, and proportionality, a process that slowed progress but ensured the investigation remained defensible. The result was conclusive. The likely killer was identified as Paul Kappen's biological father.
Yeah, so you didn't want to get them caught up into something that they didn't do. And you had to really put it out there and say, this guy isn't the guy. It was his father or mother or cousin, that type of thing. Because you didn't want to get them unfairly tarred with that same brush.
Yeah. I mean, what a shocker, though, for someone to just roll up on your door. You know what I mean? Out of the blue. So.
Like, hey, can you pass over some of your DNA? Because I think one of your family members is a murderer.
I'd be like, what? Who? Oh, my God.
Well, obviously, in this case, it was Joseph Kappen.
Yep.
A man who had lived in Neath and Port Talbot area at the time of the murders and who had been questioned during the original investigation. They just didn't have that smoking gun on him, like we said.
And he had the alibi from his wife.
Yeah, and they had the alibi. So they couldn't
really push through back in 1970s.
Yeah, but unfortunately for the police, Kappen had died in 1990, and he was buried in Port Talbot Cemetery. So investigators had now faced the unusual task of confirming the identity of a suspect who is no longer alive.
Well, after consultation with forensic and legal advisors, police obtained authority to exhume Kappen's body for identification and confirmation purposes. In April of 2002, under controlled conditions, samples were taken from his remains. DNA extracted from bone and teeth, material known to preserve genetic information, was compared to the crime scene profile. The match was definitive.
Got him.
He was the killer.
Got him. Kappen's DNA corresponded to the profile recovered from the murders of Geraldine Hughes and Pauline Floyd. Further analysis later confirmed that the same profile was also present in DNA linked to Sandra Newton's killing, despite greater degradation due to time and exposure. The findings also explained why the original investigation had stalled.
Well, Kappen had obviously been interviewed in 1973 and had provided the alibi supported by his wife. With no forensic method available to challenge it, and no witnesses placing him at the scenes, police had no grounds to proceed at the time. Only years later, after Kappen had been identified through DNA, did his former wife admit that the alibi she gave in 1973 was not true.
Yeah, if she wouldn't have lied. But she was battered. She was an
abused wife.
Yep.
And he would have threatened her, I would have thought.
She's like, if I don't back him up, then I'm going to get beaten or killed or something, or the kids are going to get,
Yeah, I think she lied to protect herself and the children from a violent man. Yeah. She knew he was violent. She experienced his violence throughout their marriage, and so I don't solely blame her for, but she should have come forward. Once he'd passed, she should have come forward and said, look, this was the situation. I need to say and tell now
Well, they had been divorced. I think they divorced in 1980-ish.
But
and I think she was putting it all behind her. And even when he died, she's like, oh, finally fucking time. I don't have to deal with him.
Could you really put that behind? Could you really not just come out and tell them, do you know what I mean, that you was forced to give an alibi? Especially once he'd passed.
She could have possibly rationalized it, saying, well, it couldn't have been him. He's not the kind of guy to go out and just kill people or whatever. He may be a violent person, but maybe she just was like, oh, well, I don't think he really did it anyways.
Let us know what you think, guys.
Well, police made clear that there could be no prosecution and no trial because Kappen was dead. And a criminal case could not be brought against a dead man, no matter how strong the evidence. Man, Weekend at Bernie's his ass. Fucking bring him up, put him in a chair. There you go, bastard.
Give him a few slaps.
Yeah. Fucking
slap his skeleton.
Fucking scumbag. Police certainty could never become judicial certainty. There were no courtroom tests or no verdict delivered in law. The truth had been established, but it could not be acted upon.
The identification of Kappen reshaped more than a single case. It altered how Britain understood the relationship between evidence and time. He became one of the first serial killers in the UK to be identified through posthumous DNA profiling, proof that death was no longer a guarantee of silence, and that the truth could still surface long after accountability had passed. At the time, the use of familial DNA in Britain was still rare and tightly controlled. The final success of the Kappen case helped establish it as a legitimate tool, opening paths that would later be followed by other long-dormant investigations.
Yeah, you had to have something that would legitimize the use of it. Because even when DNA was first coming out and being used in courtrooms, defense attorneys were like, oh, this is new, it's junk science, it's crap.
It's a bit like the lie detector tests, isn't it? I think they still don't use them in court.
No, but they would try to discredit the use of DNA and that just saying, oh, it's junk science, what is this crap, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Because they were so used to having blood, fingerprints and all that shit. But now they have something that's amazing.
Yeah. Obviously, it will take time to go through all the family trees to kind of pinpoint who it was.
Yeah, familial DNA was like, holy shit, we can just, if we can find their relative.
Yeah.
And this is where the 23andMe.
It's like a deduction, isn't it? They'll do a deduction on, okay, this person, they must be a brother because the DNA is such a close match.
Yeah.
Then they'll look and see how many brothers or how many boys are in that sort of row of siblings, and they can kind of deduct that way. So it's really fascinating how that they can.
Yeah, but now they're partnering with these companies where you'd send your DNA in and they'd tell you where you're from and background
like
and
ancestry. I wanted to do that actually. I'm thinking, shall I or shall I? No, I will do it. But yeah.
Well, I do believe that's how the Golden State Killer was caught, because one of his family members had put one of those in there.
I think, wasn't that the first case that they actually used it, and then it kind of went on from there? That's when they started in America, isn't it?
Yeah. Because the investigators were like, we just cannot find this guy. So they just sent the sample that they had.
And say, hey, is there anything you can come, with this DNA sample? And
can you find us any relatives of this person?
Luckily, they did, and they figured him out.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
But
this is a great thing. This is a great tool, especially for cold cases, where families have sort of been, years and years without answers, without knowing, that we can actually start to close cold cases. It'll be great.
Yep. But that identification also reopened questions that had never fully been laid to rest. In February of 1976, a 23-year-old woman named Maureen Mulcahy was found strangled on wasteland near the Sandfields estate in Port Talbot, the same area where Kappen was living at the time. She had last been seen after a Saturday night out. The case remains unsolved. Police later confirmed that Kappen was considered a suspect, but there was no forensic evidence capable of proving or excluding his involvement.
Beyond South Wales, the impact was immediate. The technique used to identify Kappen, familial DNA tracing, was soon applied elsewhere. Cold cases long considered immovable were reopened. Evidence was re-examined. Names emerged from files that had sat untouched for decades. The Kappen case became a reference point, not as a story of justice, but as a turning point in what investigation could now reach.
In Port Talbot itself, the reaction was quieter and more complicated. People remembered the fear of 1973, the altered routines, the caution that crept into ordinary nights, the way familiar roads had briefly felt dangerous. Even after Kappen was named, the memory did not fade. Knowing who had done it did not undo what the town had lived through.
But for the families of Sandra Newton, Geraldine Hughes, and Pauline Floyd, the revelation brought truth, but not comfort. There was no moment of confrontation, no chance to hear remorse, if any, spoken aloud. Only the knowledge that the man responsible had lived freely for around 17 years after killing their daughters, and that certainty had arrived without consequence.
Some spoke of relief, others of anger. All were left with an answer that closed the question, but not the wound. Justice, as it is usually understood, had passed them by. Still, their persistence mattered. Without their willingness to see evidence tested again, without their faith that the truth was still there, the case might have remained unsolved. Their daughters' names would have stayed buried in those files rather than fixed in fact.
Yeah, well, now every cold case breakthrough that follows carries their shadow. Each delayed identification, each reopened archive echoes the same idea, that time alone does not erase guilt. Joseph Kappen was named. Justice did not come in life, but in the silence that followed, the truth finally spoke.
So that was the story of the Saturday Night Strangler, Joseph Kappen. Ooh, crazy.
I mean, with the girl that they found, the 23-year-old girl.
Yeah, I think it's just because they didn't have any, like...
no DNA or
no
anything
DNA
like
sample.
That, no proper solid evidence of him. And you would think actually it sounds like his motive, with the three
his modus
young
operandi.
girls. Bless them, 16. Far too young and should never experienced anything like that.
Yeah.
And obviously finding out that it was their first sexual experiences, things like that. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. This case has actually been heartbreaking to cover.
Yeah. But thankfully, with the persistence, like we've said it before, the police don't stop.
No, I think it's great that they do
20 years, 30
go
years.
back. They take another look, fresh eyes, fresh, different tools that they can use, advances in DNA testing, and I think, it's great that the police back in the 70s kept that semen.
Yeah, it was.
And lucky that it stayed, because they didn't collect it and store it in a fridge.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? They didn't
improperly.
It was just in probably a little plastic evidence bag or something,
But unfortunately, on some cases, stuff gets damaged, water damage, fire damage, and then it's gone.
And moisture, moisture, depending on how they're, they use different types of stuff, don't they? You've got plastic bags, you've got, paper bags.
But
it all depends.
Yeah, but it's like the luck of 30, 40 years of nothing happening to it, because there could have been a multitude of things that could have happened, and it was a miracle.
Yeah. I do think it's fantastic that you can go back to a case that was from 30 plus odd years ago. I mean, I've seen some from 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And they've been able to do these techniques and solve them. I think it's amazing. And,
we do have a case that's like I've got on the docket. Yeah. It was like 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
So, just because there was no trial or anything, this episode was researched using contemporaneous reporting and official police statements. Because the suspect died before he was arrested, there was never any trial, court records, and all that stuff. So it's just like you're pulling from a lot of different places and that.
Different sources, yeah.
Yeah.
But we're glad you like listening to our covers of these true crimes that we do cover. If you would like to support the work that we do here in the archive, please take a moment to follow the show. Leave us a 5-star rating. It really does help others discover the stories that we tell and keeps the archive growing. Sharing the podcast with someone who loves true crime also makes a huge difference.
Heck yeah. And then you can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Murder Most British and on Facebook at MMB Podcast. And if you'd like to chat with us and other listeners, come join us on the public Crypt Chat, our free Discord space with case discussions, theories, and updates from the archive.
Everything you need, socials, Discord, and more is in our link tree below. So until next time, stay safe and stay curious.
Well, bye-bye.